20 years. The expected lifespan of the gorilla, the porcupine, the beaver. 20 years and 1,000 men is supposedly how long it took to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. 20 years since our favourite flying, bruised-shouldered, I-need-a-poo-faced vigilante first dived onto our PlayStation 2 consoles. It is the time to warp back to 2001 to visit memory lane in celebration of Max Payne's 20th anniversary. Time to rip through the veils of nostalgia and see how well it holds up today. Is the dialogue as strong as we remember? Is the story as gritty or the gameplay as investable and timeless? Well, we're going to find out, but this is a special occasion. Max's China anniversary, so we're not going to stop there, because we got not one, not two, but thrice Max Payne games over the last 2 decades, and this is the perfect time to play back through this iconic action series, and, with new 2021 vision, re-witness Max's journey from hard-boiled cop to hard-boiled egg. If you're a young'un or you've been living under a rock through the 2000s, these videos will contain spoilers for each video's respective game. Still here? Then let's begin. And if you enjoy the video, make sure you subscribe and ping that notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Nostalgia is a powerful tool. I mean, how does this make you feel? Like a baseball bat to the head, nostalgia can manipulate our memories and opinions, creating a very positive reflection of times past. But it can easily be reversed and hit straight back at you when revisiting these times, as our fond memories can easily be replaced with nothing but disappointment when revisited. Max Payne started development in 1996 when Sam Lake, the writer and face of Max in the first game, pitched the idea to Remedy Entertainment, who were looking for fresh IP ideas, particularly in the third-person action genre. What developed over the years was a well-received video game inspired by hard-boiled cop movies and a slight tipping of its cap to film noir classics with its story, themes and characters, accompanied by clear inspiration from the movie The Matrix, which launched a couple of years prior to the game. Max Payne, with its slow motion, or now called bullet time gameplay, it was pretty revolutionary.
Oh man, it would be so cool to be able to do that. Bullet time, that's what they call it.
There are 2 types of people in this world, those who enter and those who make an entrance, and Max certainly did that with the innovative gameplay and mature deep storytelling which led Max Payne to become a success for Remedy, as well as 3D Realms and Rockstar as the game's publishers.
Like taking candy from a baby.
Playing through Max Payne again now was a perfect mix of wide-eyed smiles as my childhood came flooding back, shaken but not stirred with the feeling of temperatures rising as my blood boiled to extreme heats and agonising frustration. A cocktail that got me pretty jolly, but ultimately left a bitter taste in my nutrient-consuming orifice. I could say Max Payne has in many ways not aged too well, and, well, yeah, I would be right. But it is hard to ignore the craftsmanship and passion that went into this game, which shines brightly through the many aging cracks. Our game opens with our protagonist Max Payne standing on a rooftop surrounded by police after what we can only assume to be a massive standoff. But of course we are taken back to witness the origins of our job's worth detective turned murderous vigilante in what is still a very harrowing scene to this day.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
The opening of this game has always been something that I have remembered and associated with Max Payne whenever it's brought up, and watching the events unfold today wasn't any less impactful. The setup for this is told pretty well through the introduction of Max, with his quitting of smoking and giving the impression he was some kind of hard-nut cop turned pencil pusher to be more of a family man.
That's you, Max, a regular Boy Scout.
This American dream of suburban family life, however, is turned upside down, spun round, split open and filled with excrement as Max is welcomed home by a group of violent thugs who have broken in and murdered his wife and newborn child. The worst part of this is that they are still alive when you get home, and it is you who is unable to save them. I said this opening scene wasn't any less impactful, but to be honest it was probably more so than I thought it was going to be this time around. As a child, I do not think I fully understood the implications and devastation of this tragedy that leads Max to his downfall. There is something incredibly haunting about the whole scene. Of course, that is probably to do with the desperate screams of Max's wife and painful cries of the baby, but the whole thing is just executed incredibly well, and it isn't afraid to shy away.
Michelle!
No!
I mean, for example, when entering the baby's room, the sounds of the wind-up lullaby and the images of the child's arm hanging out of the bloody crib are nothing but nightmare material.
No. No, please God, no.
This took some pretty big balls, and I cannot imagine this being shown in today's culture. I mean, not in this graphical detail with all those Karens about.
Bless your fallen angels!
But this scene sets the tone and atmosphere perfectly for the game, and as Max ventures on his revenge-fueled case, this catalyst for the events that follow lingers in your mind. Believing the killings to be targeted and suspecting the perpetrators were on some kind of new drug named V, Max transfers to the DEA as an undercover cop, something he was previously reluctant to do to track down those responsible for his family's demise.
No! And I was in for the ride.
3 years later, Max's only ally whilst being undercover is killed and his cover is blown, so every cop, mobster and their mother in the city wants Max dead. Now that our hearts have been successfully ripped from our chests, we can get into the real meat and potatoes. I think the biggest thing Max Payne always had going for it, and the one thing that is preserved with the times, is its charm. Perhaps charm is a little too much of a soft word to use considering we've just held our dear wife dead in our arms, but it is the aesthetic that is pleasing to me and has the charm throughout the game. Oozing with atmosphere and memorable little details, this is what gives the game its appeal, something I felt the later installments within the franchise actually lacked. The story is narrated by Max's inner monologue, expertly voice acted by James McCaffrey and presented in the way of a graphic novel with its drawn panels and speech bubbles. Now, I'm only assuming here, but I imagine these were implemented due to budget restrictions and the requirement to produce a very cinematic game, which may not have been possible had they just filled the game with cutscenes with the technology that was available at the time. And it was a fantastic decision, with them giving off kind of Sin City vibes and other comic books like Watchmen and so on. For still images, they really do grab your attention, which is no doubt helped by the gripping writing, voice acting and overall presentation. The art style is moody and bleak in its design, contributing to the dark themes of the narrative. The script itself, however, is unfortunately very hit or miss.
This is Lupino's gig?
This is Lupino's doing? Lupino's men? Really?
There is no denying the talent behind it, and a lot of it is impactful due to the delivery of the dialogue, and in each installment you can really tell McCaffrey gets deeper into the role of Max. However, replaying through this game now, and with the increased exposure I have to gangster movies, crime thrillers and so on, the script itself is a complete parody of the world and genre the game is influenced by, and it is not afraid of letting you know it.
They sit down in front of a TV and solve their differences with the kung fu fighting video game. I tell you, Candy, I was so depressed, I strangled them both with the video game cables.
Oh, Rico, you're so bad.
Are you freaking kidding me? It's just one lousy cop. You better be freaking kidding me. Whack him.
I am going to make you an offer you can't refuse. I've always wanted to say that.
The password, John Woo.
Come on. Okay, John Woo.
All right.
It's clearly trying to pay respects to those movies and other material with its constant pop culture references, but it doesn't always pull it off successfully. I would say the game tries to take itself very seriously with its themes of grief and revenge, but every now and then the script is just laughable and not always in a good way. As Max comes face to face with friends and foes, a lot of these characters are your cliched stereotypes. For example, Vlad and his Russian pals. The dialogue is like it's something straight out of a cartoon that attempts to portray Russians. I mean, even the number plate is vodka. Yeah, we get it, they're Russians and vodka is the new water. The voiceover work in general is pretty comedic and cartoonish in how over the top it is, but it adds to the game's character and appeal.
Pain in the butt. Ha ha! Pain to the max. Junk spot pig. Got a ticket to Marble City for you. Eat first and lying down. Bring it in.
Pretty goofy stuff and borderline slapstick, but that doesn't mean there aren't any good character moments or lack of decent subtext within the narrative. In fact, there was far more depth and hidden meaning to the narrative than I remembered, because it all probably just went straight over my head when I first played this before I had my first pube. As I John Wooed my way through Act 1, godly themes of Ragnarok and the end of the world are set in place within the story. As Max brings his wrath to the mob, he brings with him a literal storm as he discovers the mob has ties with the production and distribution of a drug named Valkyr, another tie to Norse mythology as a spin on Valkyries. Valkyries are female servants of Odin who choose fallen soldiers from the battlefield to be worthy of entering Valhalla and living in eternal paradise, an effect the drug clearly has on the minds of its users. As we shoot, dodge, dip, duck, dive and dodge through our subways and hotel hideouts, we discover a mobster by the name of Jack Lupino, underboss of the Punchinello crime family, is at the head of the distribution of Valkyr. But he clearly never watched Scarface and took the advice never get high on your own supply. Jack and his band of merry men start mumbling the mumblings of mad men, but more importantly quote the men who broke into Max's home.
Spooky monkey talk, straight from a bad dream. Mine.
I have tasted the flesh of fallen angels.
Aside from the dodgy character design of Lupino looking like a regular goon straight out of the 90s with some shitty face tattoos, these moments for me are what differentiates Max Payne from other installments in the series and many other third-person action games. It has elements of horror and a constant eerie feeling about it that gives the game a pretty unique feel, and it adds an underlying layer of fantastical lore within the world. It's very cool stuff.
Living under the skin of reality. I've seen it. The corruption of flesh. I'm the wolf, yeah! I am the wolf! It's close. It's coming. You have come.
So far the story and cinematic presentation of the game still holds up mostly pretty well, but does the gameplay still complement this?
Don't answer that. A rhetorical question.
That kind of depends on who's asking.
Yes, it does when simply blasting your way through enemies, but don't expect anything polished or advanced, and be prepared to be filled with anger at times. The bullet time combat is still fun to play on the surface, but it hasn't aged well in this particular game in the series. It is important to note that for this video I did actually play the game on a PS4. I did first attempt to play this on PC, but the game just didn't work. I purchased it through Steam and there was no sound, and I kept getting some JPEG image error. I'm guessing my PC was too high tech for the game, which was apparently fixable through downloading a load of patches, so keep that in mind if you too decide to revisit this first game, but I ended up just playing on PlayStation, which may have contributed to some of my complaints. You'll be using a variety of weapons stored in Max's magical coat, rumoured to lead to a weapon storage facility in Narnia, as you progress through the levels gunning down anyone in your way of revenge, paving the red path behind you. In the opening levels, despite the clunky movement and Max's ability to rotate on a 360 axis, I mean, I've got to get me some of these shoes, I felt like I had been welcomed back home after all these years. A big part of nostalgia is the little moments and small details that imprint on our memory. As soon as I started playing, I knew where everything was, what way to go, what I could interact with, and that's when it hit me. For a 20-year-old game, the attention to detail is pretty astonishing and puts many games today to shame. Whilst the game world is barren of people and any kind of activity outside of story events, what is there you can usually interact with in some way when it really doesn't need to be. Water coolers, TVs with actual content being shown which also matches the world and tone, toilets, vibrating beds. None of this adds to the core gameplay other than appeasing your curiosity, but it shows the development team went beyond and developed a world that felt as real and authentic as it could at the time. It was great to revisit this, and it is still a blast to explore.
And I, not me, but my double, nods and smirks at this like it was the funniest thing in the world. And then something goes wrong, and suddenly they know I'm there, hiding behind them, and they both turn to look at me with cold eyes. And the flamingo speaks again. I have no idea what that means.
Beyond that, the graphics aren't very good. They are dated, but they are still charming in their absurdity. All of the characters' faces look like they are photographs of actors whilst taking a mighty shit, and then those pictures were taken and stretched over the character models' heads. Some of the faces pulled here are just hilarious, like look at this goon trying to pop off a few shots.
I think he's dead already.
It's easy to mock these designs now, but if anything, they're memorable, and this design of Max is actually my favourite of the three games, which I'll discuss later, and to be honest, the whole aesthetic of this game is probably my favourite of the three. Venturing into Act 2 though is where I started to pull these faces myself, as I really started to feel the game's dated design, and it unfortunately became more tedious than it was fun to play. After I disposed of the Pino, met Mona Sachs, the sister of Lisa Sachs, who is married to Don Punchinello. Yeah, Mona and Lisa Sachs. Mona Lisa. Get it? After Mona politely forces Valkyr on Max because she doesn't want him getting in the way of her own revenge on Punchinello for abusing her sister, we are introduced to our first nightmare sequence. I have never hated something in my life as much as I hate these sequences, and the most painful part of this is I do not want to hate them. The idea of Max struggling with his guilt and inner demons is so fascinating, and to be implemented into the gameplay as well as breaking the fourth wall at times with the player is something that should really stand out in a positive light, but well, It does stand out, but more like an aggravated rash. Trying to save his family in a dream sequence which sees us traversing a seamlessly endless maze is a nightmare within itself. It feels like those dreams you have where you're running but being held back by an invisible force. I find those dreams terrifying, and these sequences portray that very well, but ultimately the only thing terrifying about these is the amount of money you will be spending on new controllers after you snap them in half as you attempt to navigate these thin trails of blood. One step away from the trail, you fall and start again. This wouldn't be so bad if the platforming and control of Max weren't so clunky and misresponsive. Yeah, misresponsive is not a real word, but they're not responsive. Max just moves in ways you don't want him to, and it can be infuriating. I may not have had this issue on PC with a keyboard, but more often than not he walks in zigzags and struggles to walk in a straight line like he's had one too many bottles of painkillers. The bad platforming doesn't stop with these nightmare sequences though, as through the entire playthrough there are sections that just screw you over due to poor controlling, especially when the ledges are so much like a tightrope or there are laser mines placed everywhere. The levels get progressively trickier as you progress through the acts due to these scenarios, and somewhat poor level design with unfair placements when paired with rough character control. With this also comes unfair enemy placement. Rooms you thought to be cleared or dead-end corridors to have an enemy come from behind you and shred you to pieces. This contributes to a somewhat disadvantaged difficulty spike in the game that gives more of a monotonous feeling as opposed to a good challenge, and this feeling is magnified by the terrible checkpoint system. There is no save system, apart from auto-saving at the start of each chapter, so when you die over and over again in later levels due to things that don't necessarily seem your fault, yeah, it's frustrating. The shooting mechanics, thankfully though, are still competent enough to see you through the game with both the real-time shooting and the bullet time gameplay. Bullet time slows down time for everyone, allowing you to somewhat dodge bullets and pull off precise shots at enemies. The only thing missing is a flock of doves. I say precise shots as if that's actually how it works, but it's not really the case. You can clearly miss an enemy and still hit them, and also the opposite, clearly hit an enemy and the shot will not register as a hit. This doesn't happen so much that the game becomes unplayable, but enough to be noticeable. This may be like this to assist players with the accuracy back in the day, but sometimes it works against you. This also brings with it complications with sniping or shooting enemies below or above you. Again, this may not have happened playing on a mouse and keyboard, but like here, when I was aiming up high, the reticle would autocorrect itself to the centre of a straight shot. This was frequent in sniper sections of the game to the point even my fingertips were getting pissed off. After persevering through all of the mishaps that I found, the story takes somewhat of a science fiction turn in its revelations. Turns out pharmaceutical company Acer, headed by Nicole Horn, your typical business suit villain, was illegally continuing Project Valhalla, a secret government program in the early 90s in which the Valkyr drug was initially developed to be used and studied on soldiers serving in the Gulf War. The desired effects were to essentially create super soldiers in which they didn't feel pain, increased sense of strength, and just overall badassery, and this was all assisted by a secret society called the Inner Circle, but the project was cancelled due to poor results and dangerous side effects. Horn continued producing the drug through the mob, i.e. Jack Lupino and the Punchinellos, and would trial it in an urban setting. As we have seen throughout the game, the results were still undesirable. Even less desirable was a huge middle finger up at Max, as this whole plot was the reason his family were killed. Max's wife Michelle was an employee at the district attorney's office and began asking questions after she received a tip from Alfred Woden, the head of the Inner Circle who wanted to shut this thing down before it got out of hand. Was killed by drugged up subjects sent by Nicole Horn to shut her down before too much was exposed. Michelle attempted to tell Max about the tip before she died, but Max didn't have time to listen to his wife, so naturally feels the blame for her death. If only he had listened. Whilst the story does become slightly predictable and the final baddie is quite bland in comparison to the mobsters earlier in the game, I like that this story was a small part in a much larger plan, and unfortunately for them, that smaller part was an angry Olympic diver with more balls than brains. Our story ends with Max getting his revenge on Horn and being taken away by the police, but little do they know that Max made a deal with Alfred Woden, take down Horn and his slate would be wiped clean, just like that. Of course, he says nothing about the hundreds of cop witnesses or obvious destruction throughout the city, but hey, plot, we need a sequel, right?